Thank you for the warm welcome, District 71. I remember that visit to your district so clearly. I remember the visit to the cliffs of Moher in pouring rain and freezing weather for a South African. But more than that, I remember the exceptionally good, warm welcome from all of your members. And I hope to be able to visit you again sometime in the future. But in the meantime, this virtual visit is as good as it gets. When I think back on my corporate career, I had my fair share of bosses, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when I think back of my interactions with them, there wasn't a lot of coaching that went on. Once a year, there'd be a performance appraisal, and some of those went well, and some of those didn't go so well. The ones that went well were where my boss was able to point out an area for improvement for me and give me enough substance that I knew where the gaps were that I could take action. The worst ones, and it was probably one of the hardest people I ever had to work for, it was a boss that irritated the living daylights out of me. And there I have to say it was probably my lack of maturity at that point that I didn't have the coping skills to deal with his personality. But he just simply said to me, Aletta, I'm not getting the same level of performance from you as I am from somebody else at your level. And I was incensed and I didn't know where to turn because he gave me no pointers. So in the corporate world, when I was there, coaching wasn't a big thing. I think we've come a long way since then. And I'm hoping that if you are in any way related to the corporate world, there is more coaching available to you than I had it when I was there. But when you come to Toastmasters and you are leading a team, as we all know, we're leading volunteers. It's very hard to fire them, even if you think you should be able to. And you have to be able to elicit the best out of them. And some days that's easier than others. And inevitably, there are people on our teams that push our buttons and that make it tricky for us at times. And of course, there's the opposite, the people we love working with that are a pleasure to work with. So tonight I'm going to be sharing with you some strategies that have worked for me and that have worked when I've been led by somebody else or when I've been leading a team. So I want to share those with you tonight. And excuse me, I've just got to get the lights going here. There we go. So what I'd like to do now is, of course, I don't know if I'm the only one, but it often happens that as I'm about to share my screen, my computer does something weird and wonderful. So let me just tell it to behave. Just give me a moment. Right. Should be behaving right about now. Okay, so this is all about being an extraordinary leader by being a coach. So the first question I'd like to ask you, and I invite you to put an answer in the chat to Steve, what makes a good coach in your experience? What makes a good coach stand out from others that you've had that perhaps aren't so good? So I'll just give you a few moments to give that input to Steve. And then Steve, when you've got a few, I invite you to read them out so we can hear what everybody's saying.
Thank you. I'm seeing a few responses, and for everyone else, please do find the chat feature, pick my name and type an answer to the question that Aletta just asked us about what makes a good coach. Aletta, so far we're seeing listening, organizing, friendliness, active listening, asking empowering questions, being reliable. Someone else has come up with incisive questions, actually. Leading by example, someone who motivates and encourages others, someone who is consistent, someone who can plan and helps people find answers within themselves.
Isn't that interesting? Because when you analyze those responses, almost all of them are based in terms of relationship, not in terms of tasks. That immediately gives us a clue as to what works for us. So now let's think of the opposite. What gets in the way of coaching? What happens when it goes wrong? Again, I invite you to put it in the chat.
Still getting a variety again. Lack of direction, being let down, an egotistical person. When the coach listens to respond, lack of planning, disrespectful, confusion, undervaluing people without giving any constructive feedback, and power struggles or limiting beliefs can get in the way of coaching.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. So it sounds to me like all of us have had the experience of someone who is a positive role model for coaching, and the opposite as well, that we've experienced the frustration that comes when that person maybe unknowingly is perhaps not the best coach. And as we listen to this, let's think of ways that we can ourselves improve, because at any given time, we could be the coach. And we're hoping to get a positive response from those we're coaching rather than a negative one. So the coaching essentials. The first thing is that you have to build extraordinary relationships to be a good coach. If you look at this image on the screen, these people are literally depending on one another. If one of them gets into trouble, they all get into trouble. And I like this image because it reminds me of the fact that we're all in this together. You may have the badge of the leader, you may have the responsibilities of a leader, but the team is a team. And if you win, you all win. And if something goes wrong and you fail, it affects everyone. So one of the primary things as a coach is to spend time to develop the relationships with people. That's not often something that's on an agenda item. So you've got to make time, and I talk about teams that thrive are teams that talk or make time to talk about being, not just about doing, because there's always tasks to be done, but spend some time building the relationships, building the trust. When I first went to, I think, Orlando, Florida in 2012, I think it was, or one of those years, and the world champion, his name escapes me at the moment, his phrase for his speech was, trust is a must. And that is exactly what we need to build here, trusting relationships. So have a genuine interest in the other person and take time to build those relationships. One of the favorite ways I do it is I call that person, preferably either face-to-face or an actual phone call rather than a text, and just say, how's life as a club president treating you? How's life as an area director treating you? And then keeping quiet. And you'll be amazed how much you can learn about that person and what's going on in their life just by asking that question and then waiting for a response. It's part of building a relationship before you asking them to do something for you. One of the comments we had in the chat spoke about this: listen before you speak, and don't listen to respond, listen to understand. And it's so vital that you allow others to be heard and that you listen without judgment. Because if you are listening and they can see that you are already disagreeing with them and you can't wait to tell them what's on your mind, or the magic of what can happen when you do listen goes away. So it's hard, it's easy to say and hard to do, and some days it's easier than others, but try and let all your team have their opinion and then you give yours. It just helps everyone feel like part of the team. To follow on from this, there's this concept of charismatic listening. And I came across this concept in a book that's one of my all-time favorites called The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox Cabane. And in there, she introduces the concept of charismatic listening. And it's the ability to listen to someone to such an extent that they feel like they are the only person in the whole world. You are so fully present and so intently listening to what they're saying, to understand, not to respond. And people who get that right immediately are perceived as being more charismatic, and they haven't said a word. It's a fascinating concept. And apparently one of our world famous politicians and famous for many things who got this right was Bill Clinton. And he apparently, whoever he speaks to, they feel like he is focusing on them to the exclusion of everybody else. And because so few people do it for us, it makes us feel very special, and we never forget that. So we all as leaders and as leaders who are coaches need to try and develop this concept of charismatic listening. And if you see here, until you make someone feel heard, feel is the important word there. Just speaking something is not enough, or just having them speak something to you is not enough. They have to feel heard. And once they feel heard, then they're more open to listen to what you have to say. So it's something to remind yourself about every day and try and constantly get better at that. Please be human. You don't have to know it all. You don't have to be perfect. In fact, your team can relate much better to you if you are not perfect. So take all the pressure out of the system and don't think that you have to have the answers to everything. And this sounds very obvious to say, but there are moments when we put ourselves under pressure, thinking that we should know it all. We should be able to recall something in a moment's notice. Just take your time, and if you don't know the answer, go and find it and tell people, I'll get back to you. I'm not sure about that. Let me do some investigation. This is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated leadership tools available to us, and that is the power of validation. Validation is something that's quite rare. And if I say to you, who gave you a lovely compliment in the last week, chances are there won't be 20 people you could quote. There might be less than a handful that you can think who might have complimented you in the last week. So validating your efforts, recognizing your contribution, complimenting you, those are rarities that we all thrive on. And as a leader, if you can try and make a habit of validating your team and challenge yourself, if you have a team meeting, think of one way to validate each member of that team. For one person, it could be they got there early and they set things up. For another one, it could be they kept us on time, they kept us on track. Another person, you can validate them for asking the difficult questions. So whatever it is, try and find something unique that they brought to the party. Validate them in person, send them a voice note, send them a text, but get into the habit of validating them. And in my experience, the more you do that, the more people want to work with you because it's such a positive experience. It doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable, and it doesn't mean that there won't be disagreements, but the fact that you validate those, even those who disagree with you, goes a long way towards building trust and building teams. So make a note of that because it's a real game changer, in my opinion. This is also a favorite one of mine. Sometimes you have a great idea and you know it's a good idea and you share the idea with your team and there'll be somebody on that team and they just dig their heels in. It's not going to work. It can't work. We've tried it before, and they just keep on telling you why it won't go forward. And what I've learned to do is not just to listen to what they're saying, but try and identify the subtext. So let me give you an example that you might encounter in your family, for instance. So somebody wants to go out to a particular event, and there's somebody in the family who says, no, I'm not going. I'm too tired. I don't feel like it. And that's not the real reason they don't want to go. Perhaps the real reason is that they haven't had time to go and wash their hair and put their makeup on. And therefore they don't feel they're in the right headspace to go out, or hair space for that matter. In somebody in your team, especially somebody who's really against something, sometimes the reason, the subtext, is that they weren't consulted. And they feel that you've undermined them and that you've ignored them. And therefore, they will not support the idea because they feel as if you've left them out and sidelined them. So try and understand where they're coming from. And you can do that by asking them. You can do that by thinking what it looks like from their viewpoint. But often the spoken reason is not the real reason. And if you can get to the subtext, often you can have a breakthrough because then you finally actually identify the obstacle, and it's not always what you think it is. When you're coaching, one of the powerful things you can do is to describe what you are seeing or not seeing. And the reason it works is because instead of saying, well, you're doing this wrong and you're doing that wrong and you're doing that wrong, you're describing the behavior. This is what I observe. So you're trying to say it without judgment. So describe the behavior and then describe the impact of the behavior on the project, on the team, because sometimes people are blissfully unaware of how their actions impact the team. And sometimes if you have a team meeting, it's valuable to get everyone to describe the impact of something that's not working from their viewpoint, because then everybody gets to hear what the impact is. And that often can shift the whole discussion once we realize, okay, it's not just me or not just one of the team who's feeling this way. All of us are feeling this way. Let's find a way forward. There might be a blind spot, something they're doing or saying or not doing or not saying, and they're not aware that it's causing an issue. So as a coach, you have the opportunity to present the problem from another viewpoint so that perhaps they can shed a light on that blind spot and learn something that they were unaware of. And often people, they're not deliberately doing something wrong, it's just they are unaware. And as a coach, you can draw their attention to that and help them close that gap of understanding that might be there. And always ask what assumptions are being made. In my family, my husband can never understand why my one daughter doesn't keep her car pristinely clean. And every time he sees her car, he says, it's so dirty. Why isn't she doing it? I need to wash it. And he often ends up washing her car because it bothers him so much. But the assumption he's making is that it's as important to her to have a clean car as it is to him. And that's often an assumption that we all make. We think that everybody else is like us. And as a result, we have unrealistic expectations or assumptions that get in the way of things getting done or get in the way of relationships. So always ask either that person or ask the team or ask yourself, what assumptions are being made? So now I invite you again to tell me how, as a coach, you should give feedback. What comes to mind? Just put it in the chat.
So we're getting some comments that it needs to be specific, it needs to be personal and collective, relevant, starting in a positive way, containing details, being constructive, giving praise first and then constructive feedback and then praise again, which is the sandwich method, as has been described here. And always 3 positives because negative stays longer in our heads. That's an interesting point.
Wow.
Yes,
Love
and
that.
then guiding but not directing. These are the comments we've received so far. Thanks.
So it tells me that District 71 is very well versed in feedback. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is a engaged feedback checklist that Brené Brown put together. And I think it's so insightful. So there are 2 screens and they've each got about 5 statements each. So if you want to, well, this is being recorded, so you can always play it back later, or you could take a screenshot when each screen is full, because I think they're just so insightful and thought-provoking ways to give engaged feedback. And the first statement is, I'm ready to sit next to you rather than across from you. And I think that speaks to the teamwork rather than the so-called boss and team member relationship. Let's get together on the same side of the desk and examine this. I'm willing to put the problem in front of us rather than between us or sliding it toward you. So just picture that for the moment. If we are considering the problem together, it immediately assumes collaboration. If the problem is between us, that also suggests that we could be at opposite sides of the problem and potentially not in agreement. And if I just slide it towards you, I'm almost kind of saying it's your problem, you fix it. So putting the problem in front of us sitting on the same side of the desk is a very powerful image. I'm ready to listen, ask questions, and accept that I may not fully understand the issue. And that's asking questions to understand rather than asking questions to point a finger. So it's having that attitude right at the beginning that you may not fully understand the issue. I want to acknowledge what you do well instead of picking apart your mistakes. And that's so brilliant. And one of our comments a moment ago spoke to that. In other words, the mistakes are probably a minor part of the overall picture. So draw attention to what's going well, not just to the mistakes. I recognize your strengths and how you can use them to address your challenges, instead of focusing only on the challenges and ignoring the strengths. So it's again speaking to almost like that sandwich method in terms of strengths and challenges, not just positives and negatives. I can hold you accountable without shaming or blaming you. And that's speaking to your higher self, speaking to the person I know you can become, and holding you accountable in a calm way, but in an affirming way that I believe you can do it, and let's work hard to get there. So this is a very important one. I'm willing to own my part. And as a leader, that's an amazing admission that when things go wrong, you have a part in it. And if you can acknowledge that with the person you're coaching, that's quite powerful as well, to say, I take on board that I didn't do X or Y as well as I could have. I'm also going to do my part to make it easier for you to get the job done. I can genuinely thank you for your efforts rather than criticizing you for your failings. And again, that's seeing the whole person and seeing the good as well as the things that go wrong. And it's amazing that we have to remind ourselves to do this, but it's our tendency often to focus on the things that are going wrong. I can talk about how resolving these challenges will lead to your growth and opportunity. And this is a lovely statement because it means that even though they're challenges, I'm speaking to your future self. I'm speaking to the potential I see in you. I believe in that future version of you. And therefore, let's resolve these challenges because that'll keep you going in that trajectory on towards being the person you want to become. I can model the vulnerability and openness that I expect to see from you. So if you're expecting them to be honest and admit to mistakes, you as the leader need to be able to do the same. And that when you model that, you give other people permission to do that as well. And it's a very powerful thing to do as a leader. And in my experience, it draws people towards you rather than making them, some people think it'll make you appear weak. In my experience, it does the opposite. It makes you real and relatable, and people want to work with real and relatable people. So the big question is, are you open to receiving feedback? Because if you're giving feedback to the person you're coaching, it's almost, if you're having a conversation, some of that feedback could come back to you, and you need to be open to that. It's powerful and it's useful. It can help you become a better leader. And just try to let go of the need to be right, or the need to be all-knowing, or the need to be the one in charge. Just be human. And you can build so much trust and respect by receiving feedback and responding positively to that, thanking people for that feedback. One of the big opportunities in coaching is to identify opportunities for training, for mentorship, or for something that would make a difference to that person. And I call it moving from what is to what if. It's moving from what is happening right now to a place of possibility, and speaking to that future potential of that person, and explore openly with them. How can we make this better? What if we did this? What could we do to make it smoother, faster, more efficient? And let them be part of the solution as well. You don't always have to come up with a solution yourself. Figure out how you're going to monitor progress. How will you know when progress has been made? And you will have one version of this, but the person you're coaching will have another version. So it's important that you ask them how they will know progress has been made, as well as asking yourself. And where and when can you monitor progress and give feedback? Because you don't want to wait a year till another performance appraisal. You want to give feedback consistently, because if they're doing something right, you want to be on it. You want to be validating them. And if something's going wrong, by the same token, you want to be able to call that out before all the wheels fall off. So I believe if you really want to be a coach, you should have a coaching plan, planning for success, make it meaningful, think ahead, empower yourself as a coach by doing the thinking ahead of time. And this is a very simple method that you can use. You can sketch out what's the scenario, what's going well, and if there's a problem, define the problem. Because sometimes, you know, it's something's wrong, but you don't quite know what. So try and define the problem, describe the impact, and articulate why it's so important that this gets solved. And what is the cause? And there you've got to think deeply. It's not just somebody waking up determined to ruin your day. It might be that there's something getting in the way of their performance. It might be a skills gap. It might be a lack of support. There could be a number of things. But when you're looking for the cause, look with empathy. Don't look with naming and blaming and shaming. So what's the cause? Because if you can find the cause, then you could also potentially find a solution. Try and identify what needs to change, and bear in mind that you might be part of the change that needs to happen. So be open to that. And try and think, when you broach the subject, what is the reaction likely to be? And if you know the person well, you might be able to predict what their buttons are that might get them to react badly, or you might know them well enough to know that they need a lot of reassurance while you point out the areas for improvement. So think ahead to try and think, how are they likely to react? How can I make this a positive experience? What support can you offer as they tackle the issue? And what's the plan that the two of you come up with? And how can you end off on a positive note? It's very important to make it a positive experience for both of you so that the relationship can be built in a positive way. And then always ask yourself, what did you learn from this? Because whatever you learn from this coaching experience, you could quite likely apply to a future coaching experience. And it's also something you can share with the person you're coaching. What I learned from this is that I don't always articulate my expectations well, or not. I don't do it in time. Thank you for that feedback. I'm really going to go back and make sure that next time we have something new coming up, that I do my part to help make it easy for you to succeed. So you are as much part of the plan going forward as they are, depending on the circumstances. So extraordinary leaders always speak to your future potential, the vision of who you will become. And keep that in mind, because sometimes when people frustrate you, we can lose sight of that. But if you keep reminding yourself and them of the enormous potential that they have, and that you believe in them and that you're prepared to help them get there, you'll get the best out of them and the best out of your team. So if you want to be an extraordinary leader, which I know many of you already are, be a coach.